So to start with, welcome all to DER2, also all our members online. Hereby I open officially this academic ceremony in which Miss Jennifer McDonald will defend her academic thesis entitled Collections for Reflection, the Transformative Potential of Portfolio in Medical Education. May I invite you, Miss Candidate, to present a summary of your studies and the conclusion of your thesis in the next 15 minutes. I'd like to give you the word.
Dear Pro-Rector, supervisors, highly esteemed opponents, colleagues, friends and family, both here and online, welcome and thank you for joining me today as I defend my thesis called Collections for Reflection, the Transformative Potential of Portfolios in Medical Education. Today I'll share the background and key findings of my research and present some conclusions and next steps. We need to future-proof our graduates. Doctors need to be able to adapt to innovations and unexpected and challenging clinical situations. To do this, they need to learn from experience and recognise what they need to learn next. This begins in first year when medical students adapt their study skills to meet the academic demands of medicine. For over 2 decades, portfolios have been used in medical education to promote reflection, study planning, and in some cases to support assessment. Although portfolios vary in purpose and design, they have essential features in common. Portfolios provide a place to document learning experiences for reflection. Portfolios encourage students to self-assess their progress to make informed learning plans. In settings like Maastricht and Western Sydney and many other settings, portfolios are supported by mentors who guide this reflection and study planning. However, despite their popularity, the evidence for the effectiveness of portfolios has been elusive. Mentors generally view them more positively than students, and evidence for self-regulated learning outcomes is patchy and confined for the most part to clinical contexts. These mixed findings have been partly explained by variations in portfolio designs, tensions in the purpose of portfolios, and differences in mentoring styles. So the aim of my PhD was to understand how portfolios support self-regulated learning during the transition into medicine. What works, when and why? The answers to these questions are important for optimal portfolio design and delivery. My approach was to deconstruct portfolios to explore the outcomes of different portfolio tasks across 2 years, looking for changes. I chose learning theories to match the portfolio task and the data being analysed. My research took place within the undergraduate medical program at Western Sydney University, where I work. Here, medical students work with a reflective portfolio throughout their studies, designed to cultivate self-regulated learning skills and reflective practice. My participants were drawn from the 2020 Year 1 cohort, and data were collected across their first and second year of study, coinciding with periods of online teaching because of the pandemic. In Chapter 2, I explored how and why first-year medical students changed their approach to self-assessment. Self-assessment was an important place to begin because it's integral to the 3 phases of self-regulation: performance, reflection and planning. This study helped me understand my participants and their challenges as they adapted to studying medicine. The findings in this study set the course for my other studies. Initially, first-year students used exam performance and peer comparison for their self-assessments. Students were motivated to study by a fear of failing, and for some, if they failed, it would mean they didn't belong in medicine. But friendships, early successes, and clinical experience where their new knowledge was applied reassured them that they belonged. These early friendships and learning experiences were transformative because a sense of belonging shifted their motivation from passing exams to beginning to prepare to become doctors. A sense of belonging allowed a change in the students' purpose for learning. So in Chapter 3, I wanted to investigate further what learning experiences were meaningful for students and why. To do this, I explored the artefacts in first and second year student portfolio collections guided by transformative learning theory. I analysed the types of artefacts, the activities they represented, and the reflections associated with them. What I found was surprising diversity in the artefacts students chose. The most common types, photos, diagrams, and assignments, only accounted for half of my sample of 835 artefacts. But these more common types represented activities across the curriculum and some social outings. And the strongest predictor for artefact choice was novelty, something new to the curriculum and something new to the student, indicating that timing for portfolio tasks is a key element of portfolio design. Portfolios in the curriculum need to be aligned. When I looked at the themes in the reflections associated with all of the artefacts, I found, not surprisingly, that all experience can support learning. Artefacts that sparked joy, but not necessarily learning, offered reflection and discussion around self-care and friendships. Classwork artefacts emphasise connection and calibration to confirm the student's learning. Artefacts representing landmarks or progress where new perspectives were seen were an opportunity to set new goals. But it was struggles or experiences that caused disequilibrium where the students' reflections described new insights, new strategies, and personal growth. So these findings are useful for guiding students in their artefact selection and for training mentors in how to elicit reflective dialogue about learning. In Chapter 4, I look more closely at the individual and group photos in the students' portfolio collections. These selfies appeared to tell a separate story about student learning. I analysed 200 photographs to answer the question, how do photographic self-portraits document professional identity development? Or is a picture worth 1,000 words? And what I discovered is that students use selfies to record their friendships, group work and clinical skills, complementing evidence of academic achievements. Now, identity is something that is performed. When a performance looks and feels convincing, we become the part we are playing. Selfies capture this role play and identity formation. And selfies at different time points across the first 2 years of medicine presented stages of professional identity development when viewed through the lens of situated learning theory. The photos documented beginning with new peer friendships and orientation activities, connecting through shared campus and clinical learning, and belonging when these shared skills were applied in simulated group clinical activities. Increasing integration, competence and participation are the hallmarks of joining a community of practice. This means selfies in portfolios could be used to support discussion and reflection around professional identity development. In Chapter 5, I switched tack to explore Professor Dreesen's assertion that without mentoring, portfolios have no future. I wanted to know how and when portfolio meetings with mentors supported learning. And what I uncovered were some preconceptions about portfolios that could impact preparation for mentor meetings, and may also explain some of the student dissatisfaction that's been reported in past research. Some students felt that the preparation for portfolio meetings was not worth the effort. They had more pressing priorities. Others were reluctant to discuss difficulties, fearing not only loss of face, but also recognising that without disclosure, there was little to gain from the meetings. Despite these preconceptions, preparation for the meetings, which involves selecting artefacts, reflecting on their relevance, and creating a learning plan for discussion, brought fresh insights for many students about their progress and the value of reflection. This allowed them to approach the meetings with greater readiness to discuss their learning and hear new ideas from their mentor. And many students were pleasantly surprised by how helpful the meetings were. They discovered where to focus their study, learned of some helpful strategies, and began to see the benefits of goal setting. But I think the most important finding in this study was that the outcome of first meetings shaped expectations for future meetings, whereas discoveries enhanced readiness for future meetings. Early disappointments reinforced initial misconceptions, and this, of course, reinforces the importance of mentor training and student preparation, anticipating reservations about disclosure and effort. The findings in chapters 3 and 4 mean that students can be reassured about their artefact choice. This study also means that they can be encouraged that their efforts are likely to be rewarded. However, ultimately, outcomes from meetings depends on the mentor's skills in eliciting trust for reflective dialogue and the student's readiness to share and learn. So in chapter 6, I return to my initial question, how do portfolios support self-regulated learning? My studies had explored self-assessment, collections, reflections, and portfolio meetings. And this is the conclusions that I've drawn. Portfolios allow students to record and track their academic, collaborative, and clinical performance. When students encounter challenges and feel safe to share these experiences in their portfolios, reflection is more likely to lead in changes in perspective or transformative learning. In discussion with a mentor, students can put aside their fears, refine their self-assessment, think about their professional identity and study purpose. And with these new perspectives, their motivation is shaped and they can set goals and to improve their performance. So the implications of these findings is that to unleash the transformative potential of portfolios during the first years of medicine, curriculums need to provide peer interaction, feedback about performance, challenge with safety and early clinical experience. We know this. But portfolio leads need to address student misgivings about effort and disclosure and scaffold complete and meaningful collections to support informed self-assessment. And mentors need the skills and support to guide self-assessment, professional identity formation and study purpose to support planning. Reflecting on my own PhD journey, I'm reminded of the joys associated now with 4 trips to Maastricht. During times of struggle, I was supported by my dear paranymph, dear friends, colleagues and family. I kept a portfolio, but I would say it was the wisdom and guidance of my supervisors that helped me learn new skills and make some discoveries. My journeys had parallels with that of first-year medical students, including the joy and benefits of relationships and the power of supported challenges for learning. My research has answered some questions but offers new directions for research. The first step might be to look further into how selfies can support discussion about professional identity development. Another study would be to see if early experience and engagement in portfolios shapes later engagement in the clinical years. But I think our most important and pressing challenge as portfolio academics is to understand why some students are reluctant to write reflections for their portfolios, so that we can find alternative ways to support self-assessment, critical reflection and reflective practice. That way we can future-proof all our graduates. And Prorector, can I hand back to you?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your, Ms. Candidate, Ms. McDonald, for your clear presentation. It was well adapted, and I would like to thank you for that. Before we proceed, I would also like to introduce your supervising team, which guided you, I assume, in the last 5 years officially. And we have one supervisor, Professor who is online available later on the big screen. She is professor in medical education of Western Sydney University, and here on site available is Professor Heineman. She's professor in competency-based education and assessment, and they both guided you. For our 2 visitors here in the aula, but also all the members in Australia who are online, we have 5 members in the Corona, of which will be 2 from Australia and 3 from Maastricht. And without further ado, I would like to start, and we're going to start with Professor De Bruin. Professor De Bruin was the chair of your assessment committee, and she is professor in educational research at Maastricht University, and I'd like to give her the first opportunity to discuss with you. Professor De Bruin.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidates, it is an honor to be the first one here to congratulate you with the completion of your dissertation, a theoretically and methodologically rich and rigorous piece of research on how portfolios provide potential for transformative reflections in medical education. Upon reading your dissertation, I could strongly sense that this work combines the expertise and interest of a dedicated teacher, an experienced physician, and a true academic. It's also applaudable that you enjoy charting new territory using uncommon methods, such as visual narrative analysis. And it's the visual narrative analysis that I would like to pose my first, rather short question on. In chapter 4, you chose to analyze student selfies, either alone or in groups, in the portfolios as the unit of your analysis. That was your main focus. And quite to my surprise, I read in chapter 3 that selfies made up only 20% of the artifacts that students provided in their portfolios. In comparison, the textual artifacts made up much more, 48%. Can you elaborate on why you chose selfies and why you thought they hold so much value to warrant a whole study?
Well, it occurred to me that selfies might be about self-assessment. I think that was the initial thought. And although, so 50% of the artifacts were visual, but many of them included the students. And I thought this might be another way to explore possibilities for the way students can reflect on their experiences. Because selfies are such a big part of communication now. The students are always taking photos in tutorials, and I know that TikTok is, a major cause for procrastination with their study. So I think that was why I wanted to look at them, because it seemed to be a modern way of communicating about self and experience.
Very clear answer, thank you. Then I'd like to go on to my next question, which takes a broader perspective, and it addresses the issue of autonomy in self-regulated learning. I know that SRL researchers, self-regulated learning researchers, and educators struggle with this issue of how to handle student autonomy. And many of your findings in chapter 3, 4, and 5 also indicate the tension between the potential need for autonomy and truly transformative learning through SRL and with these portfolios. In these portfolios, students, of course, had high autonomy. They could decide what artifacts they wanted to enter, and this was really important to them. You explained that in different chapters. You would describe in chapter 2 how students themselves deciding what were meaningful experiences to enter is crucial to ensure the quality of the reflection. So it's the basis of the quality of the reflections. Yet tension arises when students mostly enter, as you also found, positive experiences of academic achievement, and they avoid experiences of failure or disappointment, which is problematic because, as you describe on page 59, learning experiences without elements of dissonance are less likely to stimulate reflection. Interesting tension there. Again, complex because there's no clear alternative. As you also say, pressuring students to enter negative experiences can have or will have an opposite negative effect on students. Students don't like addressing the elephant in the room, and we as mentors can't always be aware of the invisible elephants in the room. I think this might lead, I'm interested in hearing your opinion, to differences in students' potential to learn from these portfolios. Some might be more inclined or able to be open than others, and that's going to affect every step of the development trajectory related to the use of portfolios. I see a risk for increasing inequality between students, and I'm not sure if we have the means to prevent this as educators. So my question to you is, do you see this risk as well? Can we mitigate it, and how?
Oh, highly esteemed opponent, they're fabulous questions. Can I start with autonomy? Because I think autonomy is really important for adult learners and our students. They need to have control over their learning so that they can manage, I mean, it's part of self-regulated learning. But I think we can't give full autonomy because otherwise it might all be selfies and that might not be appropriate. So I think autonomy has to be translated as choice. So there's a scaffold with choice so that you can get some, can I use the word control, over what the students put in their portfolios. So I think that would be the way to manage, to think about autonomy, but it's difficult because you've got to balance that business of autonomy and structure so that there's a fair distribution and equal opportunity for learning.
If I may interrupt you, at what level do you see this choice possible? Is it the choice of a textual artifact versus a selfie, or is it at another level of?
Well, I think the way that it's set up at Western Sydney is we have 4 areas of learning and the students have to provide artefacts across those 4 areas. We don't use canned meds, but we have, it's very similar. So that at least the whole curriculum is represented, but for example, in the professionalism domain, they might not talk about ethics, they might just talk about friendships. So it does distort what we see, and it doesn't matter so much with a reflective portfolio, but where there was progression decisions, you'd need more control over what was in the collection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, about, do you see the risk as well? This worry I have about increasing inequality with the use of these portfolios?
I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
I think there's a paradox. I think the students that are naturally reflective and thinking about their learning and quite good at self-regulated learning benefit most from portfolios, whereas the students who are a little bit disorganised and reluctant about sharing stuff are the ones who might most benefit from portfolios don't engage as well. And if I can give an example in the study in chapter 5, the study about the mentoring sessions, because and I presume we'll be talking about sampling later, but because I'd had sampling difficulties early, I made sure that there were plenty of students in that sample for the reflections that had failed either first or second year, which was really fortunate because the reflections from those students were either missing or were so simple or they hadn't answered the question. Mm-hmm. So I've got some evidence of that we've got this paradox. Yep. And I think that's part of that challenge, that we've got to find ways to reach those students.
So you do agree that there's a risk involved?
Oh, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think my time's up. I'd like to give the word back.
Thank you very much. The opposition will be preceded by Professor Van Mook. Professor Mook was also a member of your assessment committee, and he's professor in postgraduate medical specialty programs at our university, and I'd like to give him the word.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, my congratulations on a job well done, I think. Really interesting studies, interesting topic, published in high-end journals. You steepen my learning curve and on a lot of fields. Also like to congratulations, to extend my congratulations to your supervisory team, both here and abroad in Australia. So that's for the complementary part. But the thesis also raises questions, and perhaps more questions than you provide answers, but that's always the case. So let me start with a question on chapter 2, if you allow. Chapter 2, the title says, Informed Self-Assessment During the Transition to Medical School, Longitudinal Narrative Study. And you mentioned that narratives drawn from the qualitative interviews and written reflection during this transition were analyzed to examine change in informed self-assessment related to self-regulated learning. And you recruited first-year medical students. My question would be how medical school is organized in your country, because this might be different from our context. Do you, for example, have a foundational year? And do you think that the results you generated in your specific context in Australia, are they generalizable to, let's say, the Dutch or, for that matter, European context? And if you have, maybe provide me with your opinion on that, and if you can do so, what are the things you think are transferable, and are there also some findings you don't think are transferable, and why not, or why? Or are there too many questions in one?
I've got some of them down.
Right.
Thank you for those questions, highly esteemed opponent. First and foremost, first year in medical school is the equivalent of your first year in biomedical science, Bachelor of... So you have 6 years, 3 years in biomedical science and then 3 years in clinical medicine. We have a 5-year program, so it's the equivalent of that first year in biomedical science. In terms of transferability, learning is social, and my findings are very much steeped in the culture of our school. So we have a particular cohort that come from a particular part of Sydney, we have a particular portfolio design, and a culture within our school that would be very different to Maastricht. So some of the findings won't be relevant to other places, but some will, and I did try to design my studies around those common elements of portfolios. So the people undergoing transitions, like starting first year medical school, have a lot in common with other transitions, like starting your clinical practice or going into clinical training. So some of the findings will be relevant to other situations where there's transition.
But, it's a super answer, but the sub-question would be what findings in undergraduate medical education you think are transferable and what aspects are not. So what should I incorporate in daily practice in our curriculum here, and what other findings should I discard?
Just completely discard. Well, one of the big differences at Maastricht is the relationship with the portfolio to assessment, and ours doesn't have that tension or complication. So, for example, choices of artefacts, we can give, we can be more liberal in choices because there aren't decisions around competency for progression. So maybe that would be one thing that would be unique to a reflective portfolio rather than a comprehensive portfolio. But there would be other things. I'm sure it's the same in Maastricht as Sydney, that identity is an important factor when students are adapting to medical school, that fear of not belonging, that imposter syndrome. And I think that probably occurs at lots of transitions when you're wondering if you're up to it. So I think that would be transferable, that importance of discussing that so that you can plan your learning.
Right. I think I agree on the undergraduate part. You also brought up the clinical years, and let me extend that to postgraduate medical education, because I'm also the postgraduate dean. So the same question, to what extent do you think these results are transferable and generalizable to postgraduate medical education? Knowing, obviously, that 90% of the time we spend as clinicians, we spend in the workplace and not at the university. So the context is vastly different than in undergraduate medical education.
This is true. It is quite different, but again, you're joining a group. So you're joining a culture and you're understanding how you fit in with a bigger group. So that's the same as if you're joining a PBL class, as if you're joining a paediatrics ward where you're learning, who's who in that setting. And I think with identity comes roles and responsibilities, which is what drives the planning for your learning. So when you move into a new role, you've got to work out who you are before you can work out what you need to do. So I think that's common, regardless of whether it's in undergraduate or postgraduate or legal training or
All right, so the point you're making that most of the aspects you touch upon, they're generic, and so they're not so different in undergraduate compared to postgraduate medical education. However, I'm going to challenge you once more. The trend we see now in the Netherlands is that the number of residents is decreasing. The staff members or the clinicians, they're overburdened. There's a lot of clinical work to do, so there's very limited time for supervision. Most of the clinical encounters are not supervised, let alone provided with feedback. And it appears that mentoring, apart from the portfolio use itself, is pivotal for success in undergraduate medical education, maybe also in postgraduate medical education. So can you comment on the feasibility of using the portfolios in the way you suggest in postgraduate medical education?
I think it's the same in Australia, that we're under-resourced and everybody's busy, but I do believe that mentoring is really important for career progression. But I think mentoring, just like anything else, needs structure, and the portfolio can provide that structure. It gives the students or the trainee something to bring to the session with the mentor. And if they've thought about it before, just as I found in my study, then the discussion's going to be richer and maybe a little bit more efficient for the busy clinicians. Here's where I'm at, this is what I'm worried about.
But you do agree that the human resources associated with the portfolio use and the mentoring might be a different issue compared to undergraduate medical education? Is that recognizable for you?
I think resources are a really important factor. It's partly culture and whether or not mentoring is valued, and I think that influences what resources are provided. But there's a finite amount of resources and intensive cares are busy. So I think that tension between wanting to help and just simply not having the time or energy is probably international.
Thank you for your answers. I really enjoyed engaging in dialogue with you, but for the sake of time, I hand back to the pro-rector.
Thank you very much. Then the next two opponents will be online. So we move to Australia, and I would like to welcome Professor Kemp. She is the Deputy Dean of Innovation and Scholarships, Medical Education at the University of Wollongong, and as far as I understand, this is close to Sydney. And I would like to thank her that she joined us her evening, I would almost say her close to midnight already, and we're looking forward to your questions, and I'd like to give you the word, Professor Kemp.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Congratulations on your thesis. I think you've investigated some very important areas, and I was very interested to see how you have conceptualized the learning from the medical students and the implications that this might have for curriculum design and portfolio design. So congratulations on a very thoughtful and impactful piece of work. So my first question relates to the theoretical lenses that you used in each of the different studies. So you had different lenses, you had situated cognition, you had transformative learning. And I'm just wondering if you considered the connections between those different theoretical lenses that you used in the different studies. And also I'm interested in how you see the links with your overarching interpretive lens, which you described as social constructionism.
Thank you, highly esteemed opponent, for that important question and also for your kind words. So learning is social. I use social constructionism, which is a variant of social constructivism. The difference is that knowledge is created not only by experience and perception, but also in telling the story. And because my data included reflections and narratives and photos, where I used narrative analysis, that fitted best with that concept that, knowledge is personal. In terms of the theories that I used, I wanted to do it differently to the other studies on portfolios who had used self-regulated learning theory. It might have been easier to write my discussion if I'd used self-regulated learning theory all the way through. But really what happened is that the studies unfolded. The first study, I was building on Sargent's group, who created a conceptual model of self-assessment in senior medical students. Now, that group didn't use a theoretical lens, but their conceptual model best fitted with situated cognition, and that's why I used it. In retrospect, it might have been simpler if I'd used transformative learning theory. But what came out of that first study is these transformative experiences that changed this sense of belonging, which was very strong in that first study. So that's why I used transformative learning theory in the studies in chapter 3 and 5. And then situated learning theory, which is another social learning theory, was used for the selfies because that seemed to be about professional development. Have I answered your question?
Thank you. Thank you for the comprehensive answer. My next question is a slightly different, has a different perspective. You talked about the sense of belonging and this construct of belonging in some of the different studies, not all of them, but some of them. And you also linked that with context, and I got the sense that the way you conceptualized belonging changed a bit across these different contexts. And I'm just wondering if you could explain how you saw context connecting with your conceptualization of belonging in the different studies and perhaps as the work evolved.
Answer this question for you. So and please direct me if I lose track. But in the first study, it was particularly strong in the first set of reflections, that first impressions of medical school, where the students were very excited to be in medicine, but really worried that they didn't belong, and belong was a word that they used. And then that combined with the fear of failing and the whole business of maybe they weren't equivalent to their peers. So I think that's what I meant by belonging in that first study. The belonging I think you're talking about in my selfie study, which was the next time that it came up, was really probably very similar. The pictures were about starting those belonging photos. So the orientation activities where they're standing in front of the doorway that says Western Sydney Medical School, and they're meeting up with friends, and there's these joyous sort of pictures. It's that sort of joining. I suppose joining would have been an even better word. Or do we belong? I'm not sure. Have I answered your question?
Yes, no, thank you. You linked it with professional identity development. So I was interested in how you connected those two ideas or constructs and your thinking behind that.
But I think belonging's that first step in professional identity development. First, you have to know that you belong before you can become that person. So I think it's described in the literature as such.
Thank you. And one more question, if I'm... in your conceptual model for how portfolio design supports the 3 phases for self-regulated learning, you highlighted the role of disequilibrium and the student response to disequilibrium. And this seems to me to clearly link to the challenges that students might experience that would cause some disequilibrium. And I'm interested to hear how you saw disequilibrium in the context of experiences that were novel, that perhaps weren't challenging, but they were novel, and the connection with disequilibrium or the lack of connection with it, and how you thought about that.
So there is disequilibrium when you're in a new situation, new context. Maybe it's something you know, but it's a new context, so you've got to adjust. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it causes transformative learning, because it's got to be disequilibrium enough to trigger that thinking about your assumptions and taking on of new perspectives, and then changing your mind about things. And I think the importance of transformative learning in the transition into medicine is there's a whole host of things that you've got to change your mind about. And we don't often do that. Reflection's often just a process of justification or a little bit of amusing. But that business where you challenge and think about things happens when there's novelty and you're a little bit surprised and you don't know how to make sense of it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I will hand back to Mr. Pro-Rector. Thank you.
There is time available for another question if you want. Otherwise, we will proceed. You can decide. Would you like to have another question?
No, I'm happy to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then we will proceed with Dr. King. Dr. King was also a member of your assessment committee. She is senior lecturer at the Department of Health Professional Education at the Flinders University in Adelaide, and I would like to welcome her and also thanking her that she joins us tonight. Professor King, I think she will be
Thank you.
She will be on the display any moment. Technical team.
Thank you, Mr. Pro-Rector. So firstly, a hearty congratulations on a very insightful collection of studies that really highlight the potential of portfolios to be a vehicle for transformative learning. I really enjoyed reading your dissertation and learnt a lot. And it also prompted me to reflect on how we use the portfolio at Flinders University and how we can support our students to do that better. So my first question relates to your study design. So you framed your research as a qualitative longitudinal study, focusing on the first 2 years of the program. In your dissertation, you cite the importance of the transition to study medicine. And given that this was defined as a longitudinal study, could you outline your rationale for not including research with medical students in the clinical years, which would signal potentially an additional transition?
Thank you for your kind words, esteemed opponent, and your question. I think it was a matter of pragmatics and resources. I had limited funds and time to complete my PhD. And actually, I probably didn't, the sampling and wasn't probably as sufficient as I would like because I had problems with retention of that sample of participants who provided the interview data. And the interview data was the richest data that I had. I didn't really have time to look in the clinical years, but I would be very interested to know, because there seemed to be a virtuous loop of positive experience, if that would transfer to the clinical years where we also need to engage our students in portfolios.
Thank you. In your study on informed self-assessment, so Chapter 2, you interviewed students and analysed their written reflections. In the interviews, I wondered whether participants commented on the role that their advisors played in helping them to make those informed self-assessments.
No, they didn't. There was some comments about how helpful it was to see their artefacts all laid out in their presentation. We have software where they create a PowerPoint of sorts. And there were 1 or 2 quotes where it was, affirming to see the progress they made, the exciting things that they had done, but not so much about the best way to answer this is the information about the portfolio interviews was used for study 5, but wasn't used, I didn't use that set of questions for this when I said Chapter 5 and Chapter 2. In Chapter 2, I used a separate set of questions that didn't address that, but in passing there was discussion around how it was good to see what they had done.
So that might be another avenue. Oh, sorry.
Chapter 5. Can you ask me about Chapter 5?
Sure. What happened in chapter 5?
Well, the students did say that it was really helpful to talk to advisors. And so it helped them with their self-assessment. So it helped them work out where their strengths and areas for improvement were. But also, especially after the second interview, they began to see the benefits of goal setting, as though this was a magical new thing. And this was in the written reflections, obviously written for the purposes of the advisors. But it was there, so presumably there was a truth in it.
And I guess the reason I asked that question is because as a sort of mentor or an academic coach, it's interesting to see what sort of scaffolding is useful for students in that situation around helping them to make informed self-assessment, so how they utilise their assessment results and those sorts of things. So I guess that might be something for a further study, a follow-up study perhaps.
Wasn't in my dissertation, but it was an early self-assessment error of my own. So I set, can I do this? So when I was setting up the portfolio, I was also setting up my research. And part of the presentations is the students fill in a form, a self-assessment form, before they do their learning plan as part of the self-regulation cycle. But in the beginning, I didn't understand about self-assessment, and I set up a form where the students gave themselves star ratings for each of the 4 areas of learning. And almost universally, they gave themselves 4 stars for everything except for professionalism, which was 5 stars. And since then, I have adjusted my form, and it's now qualitative. They give a little description of how they're going, and that would have been so useful for the study in chapter 2. I think that's...
Thank you. So in reading your dissertation, it wasn't entirely clear when the participants were recruited. So were they recruited prospectively or sort of retrospectively? And I wondered if you could just elaborate a little bit on the timeline of the sort of recruitment and when data collection commenced.
Okay, so the recruitment for the interviews, the call went out the day before New South Wales went down into lockdown for the coronavirus pandemic. And that was done by a research assistant. It wasn't done by me, so that we asked for students. And I think that was one of the reasons. It's hard to recruit students as participants, but that was one of the reasons why I didn't have a large sample. In terms of the other, were you interested in the other studies as well?
Yes, yeah, just I guess in terms of whether the students were aware as they were engaging with their portfolio that they would be sort of involved in research, and I guess whether that impacted on how they engaged potentially with those exercises and tasks.
It's a very good question, and of course they would. The other data were assessment data, and I had ethics approval, and the students have given consent for use of assessment data, so they weren't aware. And the participants were drawn so that there was a diverse sample or representative sample in the cases of the quantitative study.
And Thank you for clarifying that.
Obviously done well after any assessment decisions, so there were conditions around using that data.
And I've got a question about chapter 4, so your narrative analysis of student selfies. You mentioned that where the context was unclear from looking at the image, you referred to the student's description that was embedded in their reflections. And I wondered whether you only referred to those written reflections where you were unsure or where there was a lack of clarity, or did you check your interpretations against these written artefacts?
It was the first answer. So I only looked when I didn't know, and I designed the study. I wanted to know what the pictures told me rather than what the reflections told me. It would be perfectly legitimate to do it the other way and look at the reflections to understand the pictures, but I was just looking at the pictures to see what story they told. So it was only when it was unclear, where the setting was or what the activity was that I looked to the reflection for that answer. And that was in the preliminary coding when I was looking at, the details about I did a lot of coding, but the preliminary where I was looking at the details of the photos.
And I suspect, you had a very large data set with, I think, 200 selfies, so it probably would have been a pragmatic decision as well. But I guess that's something that maybe could have added a triangulation of perspectives as well, sort of looking at your interpretation and then the interpretation that the participant, I guess, might have placed on those artefacts. But thank you for clarifying that. And then I guess my final question is a little bit sort of broader than the sort of individual studies that make up your dissertation. But a particular strength I saw from your research was that it was driven by educational practice. And I think that facilitates the applicability of your findings to the classroom, as well as contributing to the evidence base on the use of portfolios in facilitating self-regulated learning. And so my final question is, how has this research informed your practice as an educator?
Every inch and step of the way, it was almost design-based research. I fixed my self-assessment form, for sure. And I've used the results from my studies when I've given workshops to students to prepare them for the portfolio meetings and how to prepare their collections. And I use the words, my joy, connection, calibration, all that, both when I'm talking to students and when I'm talking to, we call them advisors, to prepare them for the meetings. Yes. And I suppose the next thing that I would do in future, incorporate in future mentor training, is that really we've got to tackle those reservations, understand where they're coming from and meet them somewhere so that we can, work with that. So that's the worry about effort and disclosure. I think they might be related. I think if you have trouble with disclosure, there's more effort involved in preparing a portfolio, and that's around task design, but also around trust and, feeling safe to do that. So that would be the next thing to do.
Thank you. That's the end of my question, so I will hand back to Mr. Pro-Rector.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be followed and basically closed by Professor Driessen. He was also a member of your assessment committee and he's Professor of Medical Education at our university, and I give him the word.
Thank you, Mr. Pro-Rector. Congratulations with this beautiful work. I remember that we sat on a bench outside in Maastricht and that you wondered, and I think your litter said, I think nobody is interested in portfolio anymore. Now we are some years further and look, 3 of your 4 studies have been published. The last paper is with advances in health science medications, I saw, so maybe published soon too. You have done a great job together with your team. So congratulations with that. I think portfolio is more relevant than ever. Maybe it's less en vogue, but it's more relevant. Those are 2 different things. I want to start the discussion where you ended with the previous opponent, and that is, you said, how can we address those preconceptions that students have? And also colleague De Bruin mentions the paradox that people who are good at reflection profit most of portfolios. And I remember in the Netherlands once a student said to a researcher, a portfolio is more something for my sister. So are there any factors related to gender or culture that make some students profit more from portfolio, or that they have different preconceptions than other students? Can you reflect on that?
For sure. Let me start with culture, because I have read about that.
Yeah.
And I think there are cultural differences in how we talk about experiences and get advice from other people. this, the setup that we have in first and second year with the individual interview might be particularly uncomfortable, and it might be better to have it in a group setting where there's safety in numbers and safety in, you know, with peers. So I think culture does matter, and the way that you acknowledge difficulties is quite, you know, cultural. So I think we've got to be mindful of that and work with that and not against it and impose one particular way to reflect. I think there might be multiple ways we can do that. But it's a work in progress. I mean, AI gives us a particular challenge because now robots can write reflections very quickly. They can even do critiques of the reflections very quickly. We've got to find ways to get our students to share their experiences and, you know, learn from others.
Yeah, okay. AI is another topic which, if for future research, would be more than relevant, I think. How will AI influence the authenticity of the portfolio content? And generative AI could even generate selfies or other things.
For sure, and the reflection to go with it.
But I think there's a paradox too. Once a dean from Mozambique came to me, Eric, our students in Mozambique need a portfolio because there's such a distance between their situation at home and in the academic setting of a medical school. And there's such a disbalance also in being yourself, your identity formation. Those students are really in need, but those same students are less familiar with these kinds of education, with to disclose failure, to share vulnerabilities. How could we do an intervention study, or how could we intervene on this? How could we help these students? Do you have any ideas on this?
I suppose we could ask them.
Of course, but that's step one. But how can we transform, to stay in your title, how can we transform this? How can we change this?
I would like to answer your question, and I need some time to think about it.
Yes, take your time. There's some minutes left. I see there's still some minutes left. So
I'm not sure if this is answering the question, but I'm going to give a quick anecdote.
Yeah.
In the artifact study, I went to a lot of trouble to get my sample size right so that I could look at subgroups, including students who had failed. But I made a mistake because what happened with the students who failed is they didn't put in complete presentations. And because they didn't progress, there wasn't a presentation for the end of first year or for second year, so I didn't have enough artefacts, which was interesting because in the presentations of that subgroup, there was far more social activity than academic activity. And that might have been a really useful finding, but it didn't crunch with my quantitative analysis because my subgroup was too small. So maybe in answer to your question, it's around that structuring of what the students present. It's got to be safe for them to present, you know, when they're feeling a little bit intimidated, perhaps because it's not their setting. But we can't have it all about football teams, which is what one of the presentation was about.
Yeah, so you mentioned it before, the more group reflection. We are, or education is organized on a very individual base. We make portfolios, so would you consider more a group portfolio style?
I think collective might be better. It might give safety, just like a focus group.
Yeah.
You get a different set of information, but it might draw out a student just through peer modelling. That might be helpful.
Okay.
And maybe there's a buddy system. I don't really know the answer to your question.
Okay. We are here to discuss questions. We don't have to provide all the answers. Then my final question is about self-assessment. The word has been used. Your final proposition is about to know oneself is the beginning of wisdom. I prefer not Aristoteles, but Inspector Callahan of Dirty Harry says a man has to know his limitations. Often our self-assessments are mirror the best of ourselves. Like your star ratings, everybody gave herself a 4 or 5. Selfies on TikTok are almost always the best representations of ourselves. How can we support and challenge students to be more authentic in their self-assessment?
I think...
You can continue. I'm curious.
I think it depends on the stage of the student.
Yeah.
I think early on, that positive... Shall I finish my sentence?
Yes,
Yeah.
you can finish.
I think early on it's really important that students have a sense of belonging before they can share their difficulties. So I think it's a developmental process. Early on, it would be okay to just present those positives, but with time and maturity, it's easier to talk about your difficulties.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers and questions.
Thank you very much. So, dear Ms. Candidate, dear Ms. McDonald, the time appointed for defending your thesis has now passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and in particular the way you have defended your thesis this afternoon. And I request that you and your company wait for the results of our deliberations and our return to this room. Thank you very much.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Dear Miss McDonald, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and particularly the way you have defended your thesis this afternoon. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you officially the degree of doctor. Professor Heineman is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university customs. And therefore I invite you, Supervisor, now to take the floor, and I give the floor to Professor Heineman.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
I promise to do these things.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Jennifer McDonald, the degree of doctor and grant you all the rights attached by custom and law. And as evidence of this, I now present you with a degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee and affixed with the official seal of the university.
I give the word to Professor Heineman to speak out the laudatio.
Esteemed Dr. McDonald, dear Jenny, it is my pleasure, also on behalf of Wendy, to warmly congratulate you with the attainment of your doctoral degree. And I can repeat this sentence because it's a double degree with the Western Sydney University, and you have also met all the requirements to be awarded a Doctor of Philosophy at Western Sydney University. And now you have the same degree at Maastricht University. So dual degree, double congratulations, double the party, but many, many compliments and congratulations. I also warmly congratulate your family and friends and colleagues. I hope that many are able to join us via the live stream today, or maybe look back later. Before I address you, I also want to thank all the members of the assessment committee for their work and for your feedback and a very good academic discussion today. Much appreciated. And also a special word of thanks to our Australian colleagues, for whom it's very late now, Dr. Svetlana King and Professor Sandra Kemp. I look forward to working with you again in either courses, research, or studies. Then Jenny, you started in the PhD writing course in October in 2018. In the PhD writing course, candidates follow a program of workshops, are linked to their supervisors, and you write a PhD proposal. That was the start of your PhD journey, and no surprise, as you also said yourself, it was one of struggles and of joy. Looking back, I remember you considered maybe the PhD proposal one of the first struggles. I look back at first versions, and here you also see sort of the iterations. Your first thoughts were portfolios in medical education. How well do students rate themselves? That was their first title. That evolved to a portfolio paradox, an exploration of when and how portfolios support informed self-assessment. I think you mentioned that word today as well, the paradox, right? And then the proposal, that was June 2019. Portfolios in medical education, how do they support self-assessment? And for many PhD journeys, we certainly recognize what we talked about today, but I think it also advanced. There was evolution even after your proposal, and you used many meaningful theoretical frameworks, and that advanced your results and also your insights in this thesis. Then it was the start of this journey, and as a team, we also needed to get into a working mode. And although there can be a challenge in having to deal with two different supervisors with two different lenses, I would say we managed and embraced this diversity. And your preparations for meetings, agendas, and minutes were very excellent, and they also kept us on target. And I would like to say what Wendy shared. She said, it can be awkward to supervise a colleague who you also see as a peer. With a colleague, there is shared knowledge, values and assumptions, and as your companion on your journey to being a doctoral scholar, I've learned very much. And if I speak for myself, I also truly felt a companion in your journey. Part of your studies were done during COVID. I think for all PhDs and for all journeys in general, that was a journey and enduring. And also, as Wendy shared, looking back, I've realized how you've diplomatically known how much to share and not to share. You shared your ups and you celebrated your ups, but I'm sure there have been also downs, especially when it was difficult to engage students who were stuck at home. We were also stuck at home, staring to their screens. But you've never shown it. You adapted and tried again, and you remained inspirationally positive. Your diverse dataset led to novel insight, and we were also enthusiastic about the results. And you revealed some very delightful, creative, new competencies. You graphed visually compelling images and also used that to communicate your results. We also saw that today. And you embraced new technology. You mentioned it already. You experimented with AI to come up with pictures, schemes, and also, I think you are probably becoming an advanced user now of the of digital technologies. So I think on the reality of research and reviewers, not all reviewers were on board all at the first time. We also had our rejections and revisions, but both Wendy and I admire your determination and looking for new roads. I think resilience is a word that is much used. It's also abused, but the quality of resilience you possess, that is remarkable. There is a calmness and a determined reserve. It has been discovery despite the disappointment. These were Wendy's words. You may not recognize these, but I fully agree. You are a transformative learner yourself, also a transformative teacher, and you can transform the people around you very well. So there were many joys. I think we need to acknowledge those as well. Your studies were accepted in very well-respected journals. You had presentations at conferences, a working visit to Maastricht, also meeting some of the people here. There you also enjoyed biking around. And you met colleagues at SHE involved in portfolio and mentoring. And some of them are here as well today. So today is a celebration. I think it's a very memorable day. A double degree, part of your journey as a medical educator and a researcher. I hope that your knowledge and experiences will lead to many meaningful projects at WSU, also elsewhere, maybe with Maastricht. Maybe there are some promising collaborations already at the horizon, so that's very good. I'm confident you can inspire and be a role model for others. And I thank you for working with me and Wendy and also with SHE, and I hope to do more work in the future. Highlight this J in your journey, and I hope you have a wonderful celebration today.
Thank you very much. I would say, dear young doctor, dear Dr. McDonald, how does that feel? Looks like it feels good. The body language is pretty clear. Yes. I would also like to congratulate you on behalf of Maastricht University and of our board of directors. I would like to congratulate also your supervision team, Professor Heinemann, Professor Hu, all the way in Australia. Thank you for taking this journey with this candidate. I would also like to thank the members of the Corona who joined us today and who took time to do this, to ask questions. I always mention that you have 9 minutes, but it takes more than 9 minutes for the preparation of these, reading the thesis and make some adequate questions. I think it's a great day. in the academic distinction, it's the highest academic distinction you can have, and you really should enjoy it. I think also it is important to mention that this is a double degree, both with Western Sydney University and Maastricht University, and we really like to have this combination. And we have already more students from Western Sydney University who have graduated over here. We will come to a close now, and we're going to celebrate, and there's a small reception, which I'm going to invite you to over here in the audience. Yes, it's there. And we're going to handle two things, or basically three things. We're going to make a picture with the people who are online on the screen. We make a separate picture on the stairs, but before that, you will have the opportunity to maybe address a word of thank or a word of appreciation to the members who are online, and you can address both to all the three onliners, to Professor Hu, Professor King, and Professor Ken, if you would like to say something brief.
Thank you for staying up so late, and thank you for your kind questions and comments, and thank you particularly to Professor Hu, who's been one of my supervisors and colleagues at work.
Thank you very much, and we're going now to make yes, we're going to make a picture now together.
Just be careful, don't drop it. Just hold from the box. Hold from the
My paramedic.
You come forward, please.
Sure, stop.
Can you come forward, please, and bottom as well?
Yep.